Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today I want to talk about stigma against alcoholism and addiction. And first, to define stigma, the definition is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. A social stigma is defined as social stigma is the disapproval of or discrimination against an individual or group based on perceivable social characteristics that serve to distinguish them from other members of society. So simply put, a stigma is the way that other people look down on people who have a certain distinguishable characteristic, such as mental illness or alcoholism or addiction. And Annie Grace talks about the way that the stigma affects healing from alcoholism or addiction in her book, This Naked Mind. I want to read about that some. She says, alcoholics, because of the stigma, usually sink low, often harming themselves and others before asking for help. It's not okay. We place this stigma on people who have done nothing more than become addicted to an addictive substance, like the bee in the pitcher plant. The stigma and the diagnosis of an incurable disease conspire to ensure we don't ask for help at the early stages when we can still avoid deeply hurting ourselves. Let's change it. Let's lose the stigma and admit that when it comes to alcohol and drugs, none of us are in control. In fact, let's stop calling it alcohol and drugs and acknowledge that alcohol is a drug, the most dangerous drug on the planet. Addiction blocks your mind from the drug's harms and deceives you into believing you are in control, despite the irrationality of your decisions. All alcoholics started with one drink. The only difference between drinkers who feel they are in control and those who admit they are not is what stage the disease has progressed to, how much their bodies, their situations, and their wallets can cope with how much they drink. They are not in control. You were not in control, and if you decide to drink again, you will give up control. So I want to talk about the stigma some because it's the stigma against alcoholism, addiction, and mental health in general that really prevented me from seeking help prior to sliding so far down a spiral of addiction that I had to seek full-term residential treatment for it. I was so scared of being labeled an alcoholic or being labeled an addict. And I had a stigma against alcoholics and addicts. I felt like I was different than people who fit into those categories. I was not going out and getting DUIs. I was not publicly intoxicated to the point where I was getting arrested for it. I was not losing my home, my family. I was not suffering greatly at work that I could see. Now I can easily go back now and look how things did suffer at work. And all these things combined to give me the sense that I was different than people who fit into the category of alcoholic or addict. What I was taught early on in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and in my recovery work in general is that you need to look at the similarities, not the differences. How are you like all these other people? And indeed, I found that once I started to get to know other alcoholics and addicts in recovery, our stories were all very different. But the similarities that underpinned all of the stories were almost identical. It was enlightening, and it was a relief because for so long I felt like I was struggling alone. And that was also in part because of the stigma against alcoholism and addiction. And if that stigma had been removed, if this had been just, if society regarded these things as just another means, just another illness that you have to work with a doctor to get over, I do truly believe that a lot more people would seek treatment before alcoholism and addiction got out of control for them. And here's the problem that I see with society today. We love, and it's not today, this is human nature, but we've got to gain consciousness of this problem so that we can try to fight it. We love demonizing each other. We love to demonize each other. We love to put people we don't agree with or people that are different than us into categories that allow us to condescend them, that allow us to look at them as less than us, because that props us up and makes it easier to ignore our own problems and the things we need to fix in our own lives. And so when I was in the worst part of my addiction, where I was drinking in the mornings, where I was drinking all day long some days, I would look at other people and say, well, yeah, but I'm not as bad as that guy. How horrible is that? And we've got to acknowledge that that's the way that we live our lives, whether we're talking about addiction or whether we're talking about sexuality or other mental illnesses. We look at these things as we stigmatize these things and then use them as means to demonize each other, to prop ourselves up, to make us feel better. And it's a terrible way for us to live. And people are dying because of it. People are committing suicide because they are not getting the help they need, or because society makes them feel like they are less of a human being than everybody else. And that's bullshit. And it needs to stop. We've got to educate ourselves about the things that we're all going through. We're all just human beings who are living on this planet together. And when it comes to things like mental health, sexuality, addiction, anything else that is a problem for the individual should be considered something that society needs to be educated about. We need to stop demonizing each other for the things that make us different and start uniting with the things that make us similar to each other. You know, at the end of the day, I'm no better or different than the billions of other people on this planet. I am a skeletal organism with a brain and a skin suit that's just trying to get through another day. And that's everybody else in the world. It's really, it bothers me. I've seen a lot of hate online recently, especially in regards to sexuality that's perceived as different. And it kills me, because I know that there are people out there who, because they are being stigmatized and treated as different, they feel like they don't belong, not only in society, but as human beings in general. And there are people dying because of that. And that's unacceptable to me. And when it comes to alcoholism and addiction, we need to stop the stigma, because as soon as we're able to do that, we're going to see people who start to be more willing to recognize their problems with addiction earlier in the process, to treat it like we might treat just anxiety. Anxiety at one point also had a huge stigma. And, going to treatment for some kind of anxiety issue was a big deal. And now, I know tons of people who are treated for some kind of anxiety and who talk openly about their problems with anxiety. And so once we start to remove that, we start to see people getting treated. We start to see people being willing to take the steps they need to make their lives better. And as soon as we can do that, we've got a chance to save lives. And that's incredibly important. But most importantly of all, we've got a chance to start breaking down walls between each other. And I think that the success of the human race in general is really contingent on our ability to stop putting up these walls between each other and figuring out how we're different, and to start uniting over all of the ways that we're similar. So I know that went from, stigma against alcohol and alcoholism and addiction, all the way to, let's unite as a species. But I think the two things are part of the same spectrum. And one of the most important things that I've learned in recovery is love, compassion, empathy, understanding for my fellow human beings is a keystone in my ability to stay sober. And the reason is that that's a keystone in being able to be human. And it's not just my survival that's at stake, but the survival of all of us. If we could just be a little bit more loving and caring to each other, that survival would be a lot more likely than the path that we're currently on. That's all I've got for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good Sunday.